Brennan.
Mr. Speaker, we've had an excellent debate this evening on the second reading of this bill, and I think, if I counted correctly, following the opening speeches, we've had 34 speeches from the backbenches, a full class, one might say, for the state sector, maybe not for the sector in which most of those opposite were educated. But can I say at the outset that there are many reasons to oppose the bill. Indeed, the provision it makes to increase the interest rate on student loans, which has been snuck into this bill, would be enough reason on its own. And just a reminder, since the Secretary of State is going to try and accuse us of being against everything in the bill because we are voting against second reading, then in that case we can warn the Lib Dems opposite perhaps that they might find that they are being painted as voting in favour of increasing the interest rate on student loans, even if they voted against the government student finance measure in the motion before Christmas. And there will be people, in a moment, there will be people, I'm sure, in a focus-like fashion, looking at the way that people on that side vote this evening. But of course there are many other reasons to oppose the bill, which my right honourable friend pointed out in his opening speech. It strips away the powers from pupils, it strips away powers from professionals, from parents and from the public. And that's not to say, Mr. Speaker, that there may not be some things in the bill which we support. And we've heard about that during the course of this afternoon, because on the surface the bill does try to make some progress, further progress on the excellent progress we made in government on behaviour, including the things we did, like the ability to search and to confiscate items from pupils, including clarifying the position on the reasonable use of force by teachers, and including being able to discipline pupils for behaviour beyond the school gate. And on the surface, there's an attempt to build on that. And what we'll want to do, Mr. Speaker, as any reasonable opposition would want to do, is to scrutinise the detail in committee and be sure that the government's proposals will have a positive impact and not drag schools into further bureaucracy or legal challenge, and will broadly promote the ability of a school to create a quiet, orderly environment for learning, because that's the kind of environment I think we all agree is not only good for the vast majority of non-disruptive students, but it's also in the interests of students whose behaviour is not only impacting on the learning of others, but on their own. So we'll have a look at their proposals in forensic detail, Mr. Speaker, in committee in a minute, including the points made by the Honourable Lady for Sheffield, Healy and others during the course of the debate, to make sure it's not window dressing and to make sure that it's a genuine enhancement of what we achieved in office and that it doesn't cause more problems for teachers and schools. And as indeed with Part 1 of the bill, which seeks to build on the revolution in early years provision, Mr. Speaker, the revolution which Labour pioneered in office, and in particular we'll want to look closely at the power the Secretary of State is awarding to himself to decide who gets early years teaching, for how long, for how much in fact, and when. So we'll approach the bill in committee in that way, but overall we'll be opposing the bill on second reading because it fits in with the ideology of this coalition government, along with a number of other pieces of legislation, an ideology which the Lib Dems appear to have been duped to going along with, seduced it seems by lady localism. Well, she's not what she seems in this bill, and I ask them to check very carefully what this bill does about localism. It used to mean enhancing local democracy to the Liberal Democrats. It's all part of this Orwellian use of language that the government's adopted now, like the Home Secretary, where a curfew becomes an overnight residence requirement. Localism is a bill which takes away local democratic power, moves power away from communities, teachers and parents into the hands of one man, the Secretary of State. And this is described, Mr. Speaker, unbelievably as a decentralising measure. He's taking more than 50 new powers to himself to control almost every single aspect of the school system. I haven't got time to list them all, as he knows, including which subjects students should study, how teachers should teach, here's a few examples, and what kinds of schools communities should have. He'll say he's just nudging them in that direction. Well, Mr. Speaker, when you nudge someone with a loaded gun, it's very different from a gentle steer. Now, what is it about the Secretary of State, Mr. Speaker, assisted by the Schools Minister, that makes him so obsessed with grabbing more and more power to himself at the centre? Megalomania, says my right honourable friend, from a sedentary position. Well, I wouldn't quite go that far, but whether it's the power to close schools or the power to individually discipline teachers, which has been so carefully and consensually put beyond politicians in recent years. Why the big power grab? He reminds me a little bit, I don't know if there's any people here with children who've ever seen the cartoon, the TV cartoon, Pinky and the Brain. If anyone's ever seen it, he and the school secretary remind me rather of that, because as the title suggests, there are two characters in this TV cartoon. Pinky is good-natured, but he's dominated by the brain, Mr. Speaker, who's self-centred and thinks he's a genius. And every episode, after the opening titles, there's this piece of dialogue. Pinky says, "Gee, Brain, what do you want to do tonight?" And the brain says, "The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world." And it seems that could almost be a transcript of the ministers' meeting at the Department of Education. And I know the Secretary of State thinks he's clever, possibly the cleverest boy in the government, but trying to create an education system in his own image, with all the powers in his own hands, is ultimately a recipe for chaos, I'm afraid, and I'm afraid for him, not world domination. But he's so intent, Mr. Speaker, making sure he grabs all the power to himself. He's getting rid of some of the bodies in this bill that might get in the way of his scheme, not once, but twice. Bodies like the General Teaching Council, which was set up to give teachers the same sort of professional autonomy as the other valued professions, are abolished not only in this bill, but also in the Public Bodies Bill. Presumably just in case abolishing them once isn't enough, and to make absolutely certain that they are absolutely dead, in case they suddenly rise up like a false ending of some schlock horror film, Mr. Speaker. We knew the Secretary of State had a penchant for drama. We see it every week in the Chamber, although not sufficiently enough to include it in the English back, I hasten to add. But killing a body twice to make sure it's dead is a bit over the top, I think, even for him. So why this centralising power grab? It's not just power for power's sake, it's part of his vision of education. In their mind's eye, he and the schools minister see serried ranks of school children sitting at individual desks, preferably wearing short trousers, chanting after their teacher, their conjugated Latin verbs, copying down the dates of the kings and queens of England from the board. Did I hear here from the other side? I think I might have done. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, he thinks that's how you raise standards. He's wrong. A curriculum designed to train a few people to run the empire, I'm afraid, is not a system which will inspire and motivate the next generation to use their talent and creativity for the maximum benefit of themselves and the country. He's made it clear that in his mind, a C, a GCSE in an ancient language, a laudable achievement in itself, is more valued than an A star in engineering or ICT. He is, to coin a phrase, creating an analogue curriculum for a digital age. All pupils need the basic building blocks of literacy and numeracy, but beyond that, Mr. Speaker, corralling pupils into a narrow range of subjects post-16 restricts choice, stifles creativity. Schools up and down the country, having been nudged by the Secretary of State with his loaded gun, are busily now rewriting their timetables and pressurising pupils into taking GCSEs which are not necessarily the best ones for them to fulfil their individual talents. Bear in mind, they'll have already studied history, they'll have already studied geography through the National Curriculum, science, and they'll have studied a modern language. And the English back took a bit of a kicking from someone on his own side today, and I think he should listen to what they had to say. And why is he doing all that? Just so that the Secretary of State, at the end of this Parliament, can point to a measure he invented and imposed ex post, that's a bit of Latin, by the way, in case anyone didn't know, and say, look how we've improved things. More people are studying the subjects which we have retrospectively said they should have been studying all along. It's pretty hard, actually, Mr. Speaker, to fail a test which you set when you set the question yourself beforehand. And as for the PISA tables, that's fine, and the provisions in the bill, but he'd better stop misquoting statistics which he knows that the OECD have disowned, and stop ignoring evidence. Stop ignoring evidence like that from Hong Kong or Scandinavia when it doesn't suit his overall vision. And when he finally gets round to saying something about vocational education, which he fundamentally seems to believe is for people who don't do well academically, actually medicine's a vocational training which he ought to support. His problem is he sees the English back as the Premiership and any league table of vocational qualifications as the BISA Holmes League. Finally, Mr. Speaker, what I would say, there's nothing wrong with the Bees Homes, Lee, I agree with the Honourable Member. What I would say finally, Mr Speaker, is this. Presumably the decline in social mobility in government ministers is something he's going to blame on the past Labour government. It's our fault that his front bench is dominated by old Etonians because we didn't do enough on social mobility when we were in government.